even as a little kid. There's 2 points when I started doing my art. There was a point where when I talked to my mother and said, and she said, go on and paint, nobody will let you start. So I count that as one point. And then about 4 years or 5 years later from that, when I really started my art, this is after I stopped getting high and really focused in on it. And so I would say my real career as an artist started around 93, 92, 1993, 1992. So,
And when did the poetry come into play?
That poetry came in my teen years, then it stopped. Then it came back in my 20s when I was at NYU. I used to scrawl, I sort of bomb like graffiti poems all over the place, in the hallways, in the bathrooms, in Washington Square Park. My first poetry book, and I wrote a number of novels before I really started writing poetry. So the first thing I had published was not a book of poetry, it was a novel called 3 Days as the Crow Flies, about somebody's experiences in the Lower East Side during the 80s, the mid-80s, and a lot of hip-hop and cultural icons of that period appear in the book, and this guy from Brooklyn who was a painter. So that came out, I don't even know how long ago, maybe about 15 years ago, 12 years ago. And then my first poetry book came out, A Dream My People Were Calling But Couldn't Find My Way Home. And at that time I was inventing deaf poetry, so I wrote a book on deaf poetry. And then my second book of poetry came out, then 85 came out, which was a graphic novel of A Dream My People Were Calling. And that was published also by Simon & Schuster, as was as was 3 Days as the Crow Flies. That was published by Simon & Schuster. 85 was published by Simon & Schuster. And then my next book of poetry came out, Deep in Your Best Reflection, poems in 160 characters. And that was a strange book, a little of erotic text poetry. I started writing poems that were the length of one text page. And so it was 160 word characters. And so I had to get the poem in that little short period of time. So, it was very hot, very heavy, very short. Like, boom! Like, oh! I enjoy creating things that make people have to think about it. I don't want to create something that somebody really just looks at it and gets it right away. That's not, that's fine for some people, it's not for me. I want people to stretch their imagination, to sort of bring some of themselves to what I write and paint. A lot of the things that I have place little like signposts where people can find meaning and then they enhance the meaning themselves. I know what I meant, but I want the poem to mean something personal to them. I don't necessarily want them to know exactly what I felt. I want them to make them think about what they feel about it. And I find abstraction both in words and in paintings do that, because it makes you feel. And then once you start feeling something about it, you start thinking about it more. So I think abstraction for me is the way that I engage with people, because I want to bring some of them to the conversation, not them just understanding me. I don't listen to a lot of music that's written today, to tell you the truth. But the stuff I hear, it really doesn't push to elevate anybody. It seems to find, and people seem to seek the lowest common denominator so they can do. So, sex, money, commercialism, I own it. All the signposts in music today are very materialistic, very of this earth, and none of it is spiritual. And I don't mean in the way like, go to church spiritual, but none of it is deep. All of it's very carnal and basic. And I think that what's missing in music today, for the most part, because there's some great underground people, and don't ask me who they are, because I'm not, but I heard them. What's missing is the fact that, people have made music easy and they made it commercial, and they have not made it to elevate anybody's thinking or say anything that's of any relevance other than what's immediate.
And if you could bring one artist from your past and bring him or her here today to teach today's generation, who would that artist be?
You talking about music?
And it could be art too.
One artist from my past. Jesus. I think I'd have to bring Jimi Hendrix back. Because he is the epitome of a musician who pushed all types of boundaries in the way he lived, the way he looked, the way he dressed, the way he wrote, the way he played his music. And what he did was create a open space for people to be innovative. And especially for young black kids to look at somebody who was so completely different from anything they had ever seen before and say, this is all right, that you can do your own thing. And then to listen to the lyrics that he was talking about that gave people the freedom and the opportunity to think for themselves and to become more than they were, is simply amazing.
Well, you're part of a musical family. How come you never joined in with your brothers?
What?
Like whether it's within the artistry or somewhere in the background.
You know, I am joined in with my brothers. Me and Russell created Def Poetry. We created Rush Philanthropic. They were my ideas, but Russell collaborated with me on them, and so did Run on the foundation. Music, I like music, but it wasn't where my heart was. If I had joined, Russell asked me early on because I helped finance some of his earlier stuff. And, you know, he would give parties and didn't have any money, and I'd lend him $500 or $1,000 or something like that. We got into many a fight about getting paid back too. But at one point we were coming from one of his parties and he said, yo man, why don't you be my partner on this? I think I might have asked him for my money. That might have been his excuse to like, you could be my partner. I don't know. But my thing was, I told him, and I didn't quite know exactly where my life was gonna end up. No one does. But I said, that's not the path I wanna go along. And like, while I like music, I didn't have the passion that Russell had for music. And, you know, Russell and I later on bought a house together. And I used to have to send Russell back upstairs all the time because he lived upstairs apartment, I lived downstairs apartment, and not too far from here in Crown Heights on Park Place. And Russell would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning with some idea and come down and wake me up and start trying to talk to me about some shit he was thinking about. And I was like, yo, Russell, man, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, but I just gotta tell you about this. And I didn't have that kind of passion for music. I might have had that kind of passion for art, although I never woke him up at 4 o'clock in the morning. But, you know, you have to have the passion for it to mean something. I didn't have the passion. For me, if I went into that, it would have been about money. And, you know, that's never been my objective and goal, like to make a lot of money. And that wasn't Russell's either. He ended up making a lot of money. But his objective and goal was he loved the music. And that's what he wrapped his life around. I didn't love it like that. So that's why I never. I like living in Brooklyn because, first of all, you know, Queens was too rural, and even Hollis, and Manhattan just too dense. So I like the real estate in Brooklyn. But when I moved to Brooklyn, there was such a density of artists here that, you know, it was easy to fall into a creative community. And so, you know, you were around a lot of people that were doing creative things. And so, you know, it helped push you to be creative. And you had a lot of people to talk to about your art and talk to about, you know, a number of things that you wouldn't happen to have in Queens or any place else. So when I moved here in the 80s, it was exploding with people, creative people that, you know, came from everywhere. They lived in particularly downtown Brooklyn, Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, Bedford-Stuyvesant. Every other person I ran into was an artist of some sort, singer, writer, dancer, you know, painter, you know, poet. I mean, you know, for New York City, the spoken word movement started in downtown Brooklyn, you know, a couple of clubs, and I just took that and ran with it and created Def Poetry. I see the artist community in Brooklyn diminishing. And it's one of the great problems that I would like to tackle before I give up my career in public life as a, sitting on all the, is, artist housing. There's a lack of affordable housing for artists. There's a lack of studio space for artists, and therefore artists are leaving Brooklyn. You have to be like really, well off to live in the neighborhoods we used to live in. Unless you bought a house like I did early on, who could pay, be an artist and pay $3,000 a month rent? It's just almost impossible. So people have moved further and further. The people went to Bushwick because they couldn't afford to live in Clinton Hill or this, that, and the other. People went to Williamsburg because those were neighborhoods that nobody else wanted to live in. Now people are going to Brownsville and East New York. I mean, they're hipsters and artists in Brownsville, much to the consternation of a lot of Brownsville people, and East New York. And they're looking at all the warehouses and stuff that's in East New York. And they're going to price people out of those neighborhoods eventually. And gentrification, quite frankly, started with artists moving in to these neighborhoods, and then other people followed the artists. The artists weren't the problem. It was the other people that followed the artists. And so that's how neighborhoods got gentrified. Once the artists moved in and people perceived the neighborhoods to be safe, and once they perceived the neighborhoods to be safe and looked at the housing stock, they said, well, I'm going to live over there too, because they couldn't afford Manhattan. So Brooklyn's going to have a problem in sometime in the future because nobody will be able to afford to live here. And so one of the things I have is a project that tries to help empower artists called Curate NYC, and it gives artists a platform to show their work. So perchance they may, sell some work or meet curators or somebody to help spark their careers. So, I mean, it's a huge website with thousands of artists on it, and we market it to curators and galleries. And we've connected a lot of artists to things that have helped move their careers forward. It's sponsored and largely in part by the New York City Economic Development Corporation. So, I mean, we propose to them to do this in order to help save New York's artist economy. The arts bring in $25 billion a year to this state in tax revenue. I know that because I used to be the chairman of the State Arts Council. And, that'll be draining as artists leave. That will be draining. That's a lot of money, man. And every dollar that's put into the arts, New York State gets $1.72 back in value. So, a lot of services, you just pay for them and the value is gone. The arts probably one of the only public services that create value and economic growth for the state. Although people don't recognize it as that. People recognize art as being paintings on the wall or somebody dancing, but it really is an economic growth generator. And, when they defund arts program, really what they're doing is taking money out of their own pockets. This latest book, the Brown Beatnik Tomes, some of the poets, I like abstraction. I like it in my literature and abstract thoughts in literature, and I like abstract thoughts or movement in paintings. And some of the poetry that I gravitated the most to, modern day poetry, was Beatnik poetry, because they took a lot of social and political concepts and abstracted them. So, poems like How discussed a lot of different issues, but it was a very, very abstract poem that was very Homer-esque in that it was a journey. And a lot of my poetry is like that. And so I started thinking about the Beatnik era, and I started thinking about, well, who are the black Beatnik poets? Were there any? And of course, during that period, there was Amiri Baraka, who was then Leroy Jones, who was on that scene and did poetry with the Beatniks. But, outside of him, I can't think of any, and I'm sure there was some. Yeah, but, I'm not a literary scholar. I'm just a poet dude. So I wrote a book envisioning myself, thinking about the issues and thinking about the times and thinking about what a Beatnik poet a black beatnik poet might have wrote. So I wrote this book, the Brown Beatnik Tomes, all around, most of it is around, some of the poems are loosely tied to that, some are more directly tied to that. But around the thought of who would that person be and what would they be talking about? And then I incorporated that with some of my abstract expressionist paintings, which was a movement that was around at the same time as the Beats were. On the painting side, there was Jackson Pollock and a bunch of other people. And there was another painter, Norman Lewis, who was an abstractionist who didn't get any dap, but he's one of the better painters of the abstract expressionists back then, and he was black. And so the paintings I incorporated along with the poetry in the book were all about paying homage to that era and what it would be like to be a black person doing arts in that era. And then I created and worked with the designer to create a book that was really unique because the book is a flip book, like a sketch pad. So you flip the pages like this instead of opening it and turning it like that. So you got like a sketch pad full of paintings and poetry. So it's like the dude was writing, he flipped the page, and the dude was writing, painted something and flipped the page. So it's sort of a unique book in that way.